Hello there. Welcome to my podcast. My name is Brett Lovins. This is a podcast on, here come the buzzwords, alcoholism, substance use disorder, addiction, recovery, all words that were absolute poison to me not so long ago. And now I use them easily and embrace them. And so I just put that up front for anybody that just got through those words and was uncomfortable. I get it. Believe me. But I'm going to set that aside. So next up is to talk about today's podcast episode. This is a really important, special one to me. This is a conversation between my wife, Molly Sanders, and myself. I'm really stoked that she's willing to share part of her story with you. We've been together 24 plus years. And as such, she had a front row seat to what the progressive nature of this disease looks like as she watched me spiral or ride the elevator down. And she was also there when I stepped off the elevator. I refer to those final months as the final approach. So you'll hear us talk about the final approach a few times. And I tell the whole story of my final approach, those final months, weeks and months of drinking and drugging and to my first day of sobriety. I tell that whole story in the previous episode. So you could go and listen to that episode if you want to hear that as well. Also want to do a shout out real quick to some of the folks at Cisco Systems. I'm really amazed at how much support I'm getting from Cisco when I was willing to kind of come out of the shadows and, be a voice of recovery. Trying to normalize talking about this, trying to, push back against the shame and stigma that surrounds it. And also to help some people, right? So my why is solid, and I'm just super grateful to some of the folks, and I'll just name a few. Helen, thank you for helping put that blog up. Some of you will have arrived at this podcast from a blog that went live recently, and also Tyler for helping with it as well. I want to continue to thank Nat and Sheila for their willingness to support me and encourage me on the global benefits team. And also Dr. Zane for having that original conversation that kind of kicked this whole thing off and got me rolling and got me over a hurdle of shame and stigma with my own recovery so that I was willing to talk about this out in the open. And then finally, I just want to, call out the obvious, but super important. And, I'm so grateful to Molly for being willing to share part of her story. We have conversations a lot. I think her outlook and her perspective as she watched me spiral down, got that front row seat to the progressive nature of the disease. I think it has the potential of helping a lot of people. These are our stories. They may not resonate with you, or they may not be the same as yours. They're just ours, and we're hopeful that they help a few folks. Molly, you're amazing. I love you. Thank you for doing this. Thanks to those of you that are listening. I'm hearing from some of you that it's helping some folks. That's the whole gig. So let's roll the conversation. Yeah, so how do we start this? We've never had this conversation recorded. We've had bits of it along the way, right? I think I know most of what you're going to say, but it's possible I will be surprised.
Oh, I've been saving some things.
Maybe. And you've been watching me do this podcast, so you were willing to turn on microphones, and probably the highest quality mics we've had. Yes. Yeah. So those that are regular listeners will notice that Molly has brought her high-tech microphones to the mix, to the party. And so it probably sounds really good. So do you want to just start talking, or do you want me to kind of cue you up? How do you feel?
Why don't you cue me up?
Okay. So you listen to I think starting with the final approach would be a good way to go.
Sure.
So obviously we've been together 24 years.
Something like that.
So you've seen the whole arc of what my drinking looked like all the way back, because I was drinking heavily.
Yeah.
So you heard my perspective on what I'm calling the final approach. So it's that final while of drinking. Mm-hmm. And I said in places that you had a front row seat. So what was going on for you starting? Do you want me to give you a starting time? How do you feel?
No, I feel okay. I mean,
okay.
I think I could share some things, and then you can, let me know what you think or
Sure.
ask questions or whatever.
Yeah.
So, the final approach, I mean, to take a step way back to the very beginning when I first met you, you were this fun-loving musician, life of the party. Everybody loved being around you, and I was drawn to that. I remember early on in our relationship being concerned about the amount you drank. And you drank more than anyone I'd ever been around. But you didn't match the other parts of a problem drinker. You were always fun. You were, you didn't get angry. You didn't get nasty. You did some things that obviously a sober person wouldn't do, but it was never, I never felt, I always felt safe. And so those things didn't match, like my view of, or what I was culturally exposed to of what a drunk person is and acts like and does. You didn't fit that at all, except for the amount you drank. And I remember when I first asked you about it, that your response, I don't know, well, you probably remember this, but your response was you started to talk to me about the history of alcohol use and that it's always been a celebration and this ritual. And you talked about mead being discovered, you basically gave me a history lesson. And I thought, I was impressed. I thought, wow, you've really thought about this. And then the thing that you said to me that really got me was you said, it's stress that kills. It's not, alcohol. And you were so, you believed it. And it really hit me at that time in my life because I was really struggling with stress and depression. And I felt like, well, gosh, who am I to question you? You're having a great time. And so that was early on. So I knew there was something, I felt at the depth of my core that there was something wrong, that there was something unhealthy about the way you were using alcohol, but I couldn't give evidence of what was unhealthy because you were fine. You were functioning, you were having you were producing at that time, you were, into music and traveling and then you got a job with computers and you were functioning. And it wasn't impacting our relationship at that time. And so then, it gets progressively worse, as you told in your podcast. And the whole time I just kept feeling like there's something wrong here. And then I'd have this horrible, like we had a couple of times where it didn't go very well, me bringing it up. You were not very open about talking about it. And you just kept being adamant that it's stress that kills. And you gave all this evidence of how you were fine. So I didn't have a whole lot to go on. And when we moved away from our home state to Colorado, well, Florida first, and then we were in Colorado. But for me, I remember it being Colorado where I started to go, I need to come up with an exit plan, because I was watching you at that point in our relationship. It was, 15 years in. About 15 years in, we'd been together, and it was impacting our relationship in that it still wasn't impacting in the way that all the movies show. You weren't abusive. You were still there for me. I was, chasing this dream. We were traveling across the country. You were still extremely supportive. So I didn't feel a lack there, but come 5:00, I started to feel like, okay, I can't have people over. We had people show up just, out of the blue. And I remember feeling so embarrassed because you were slurring at that point. And it was impacting us in that I knew there was something wrong, but we couldn't have a conversation about it. And I felt horrible bringing it up. I questioned myself. Maybe there's something wrong with me. But when I got quiet with myself, I knew there was something wrong, and I knew it was not going to get better. You were definitely worsening. And I also knew that I couldn't make you better. I knew there was nothing I could say or nothing I could do. I knew it had to come from you. And so I remember we were in that little cabin in Pagosa, and it was at night, and I was laying there, and I realized I need to decide how long I can stick around. Am I going to watch you basically kill yourself? And that was really hard. Wow. But I knew I needed to, I knew I couldn't take responsibility for it. And it's interesting because I hadn't talked to anybody. I hadn't researched it. I didn't know about, I knew about Al-Anon, I knew about AA, but more because you hear about it in the movies, or, I know we had family in distant relatives in my family that were in AA, but also relatives that had gone to Al-Anon. And it was kind of like, I had this view of it as this, just not a very good place to be, not a very healthy, not a place to go to be healthy. And so I came to it. For whatever reason, I knew that there wasn't anything that I could do. So anyway, I detached at that point. But then we still did things together. So it's kind of hard to describe it, but there's a part of my heart that I closed off. And then it did, like you described it beautifully in your last podcast about what happened. You started to go into more, like tequila and doing things where you're hiding, and yeah.
Yeah. Let me jump in, because I want to overlay some of the physics that's going on at this point in our story. So we're in Pagosa. And I think Pagosa is where so you used the word worsening a couple of times. For somebody that doesn't know what that means, what does it mean to worsen? I'm going to suggest that it means that I'm drinking way more quantities.
Oh, yeah.
I'm slurring earlier in the day. I'm passed out. Like Brett shuts off at pretty much 5 every day. Is that square?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, for sure.
So one thing that, we've talked about is during that time, and everybody's got their story. I just like to be transparent with my story, because you're at the front row seat, and you know this, but this is where in Colorado, beer isn't normal in the grocery store in Colorado at that time.
Okay, yeah.
If you go to the grocery store to buy beer, you're going to get a watered down version of the beer. I think it's called 3-2.
Right.
So then I find out that I need to go to the liquor store in order to get my beer.
Okay.
Now, I wasn't a liquor guy per se, but that's where I started going to get my beer at the liquor store. And I remember starting to buy airline bottles from the candy counter there of airline bottles. So I would just like to suggest that your observation of this worsening also overlays with the strong introduction of hard alcohol to the mix. Not that I hadn't been drinking heavily to oblivion, but now I was adding high octane to it.
Right.
So
and another little thing that happened right around that time when we were in that little mountain town, was that I remember one time we had where a little outdoor closet kind of where the water heater was.
I know where you're going.
Yeah. And you had the recycling out there, and you were really adamant that was your job. Recycling and garbage was your job. Yeah. Well, at that time I'd started this whole recycling program I was working on a horse ranch, and so I remember one time I was taking recycling, and I looked in there, and there were garbage bags full of beer cans and bottles, and I thought, well, this is silly. I'll take the recycling. And I did. It was a little shocking how much was in there, but I figured you'd been, at it for a while. And I was fairly aware of how much you drank. I know that you hid stuff, but I could see, it was already, before the escalation, it was already an obscene amount of alcohol.
Right.
And anyway, I remember how upset you were with me that I had taken the recycling.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was out of character. It was just weird. And I was just like, this is strange. And that was right around that same time that I was like, yeah, things are getting really odd. And it was right around that same time that a friend of ours came over at about 6:00 and checked in with, I was kind of standing out with her talking, and then she checked in to talk to you, and she came into the house, and you were slurring, and I was so embarrassed. And yeah, so anyway, then, fast forward to the other thing too is that you'd had many times, like you mentioned in the last podcast, where you had chosen a month to stop or to not drink anything, and you always chose February, which, is kind of funny because it's the fewest days, the smallest month. And I'd always be hopeful during those times that because I also escalated my alcohol intake.
Sure. I
was drinking 2 to 3 glasses of wine a night. And then I would, if we'd go out to dinner, I'd have a cocktail as well. So I was drinking more than I ever had as well. Not your fault at all. I just I noticed a ramping up for myself as well. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, where you take the month off. When we would do that, it was always frustrating for me because if I set a goal, as you have come to know about me, I'll do pretty much anything I can to make sure I get it. And so when we'd get to the end of February and it would be like February 26th, and you'd say, well, let's just go ahead and celebrate that we got this far. And I'm like, no way, we're not to the end of the month. And there were quite a few times where we stopped early, and it just always felt like it felt like cheating at cards. Like it didn't feel like we achieved the goal for me. And I didn't understand why you did that. And then the thing that really baffled me was when I would start to drink again, because we'd usually go out to dinner and have a glass of wine, or I'd have a glass of wine, you'd have whatever. And I could only have half a glass of wine, and I'd be like, whoa, I'd totally feel it. And you were right back at it and then some. And at that point, I felt like it was a willpower thing. Mm-hmm. Like, what's wrong with you? I don't remember any fights that we had, but I'm sure we got into it because I, at that time, would definitely tell you, and I'd be disappointed, and just not understand. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand it. So then when we get into the final approach, we now have had many times where you've said you're going to back off, and I kind of stopped being as hopeful that backing off would result in a reset for you or a new perspective. I knew that if you stopped drinking, as soon as you started drinking again, it was just going to be back to where you were. So when you started to talk about that final approach and the full court press, it was different. You started to use language that you hadn't ever used before. Like, I think I might have a problem. I think I might need help. Like, you'd never said things like that before. And so I did allow myself to get hopeful, like really hopeful. And we talked a lot. I went and met your counselor, Steve Dunn, an amazing man. And I was really proud of you. But the trigger of distrust was extremely light. Like, it didn't take much to trigger that. And when you, in what you told, when it was the moment that I thought, here we go again, and this is all a wash, was the day you had gotten to the end of May and you decided you wanted to do that goodbye to alcohol thing, which I was all for. I still was really trusting you because it was still unlike anything you'd done before. So I was really hopeful, and you were very forthright with me. You were sharing so much with me. And then that morning when you were supposed to have been done after we went to all the different bars, and you said that you wanted to have one more time to mow the lawn. And I was like, I don't think I said anything to you. I don't remember. But inside I was like, oh, here we go. It's done. It's over. Because you had already said what your finish line was, and you were resetting it. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of triggered all of those moments of, let's not wait till the end of the month, Mm-hmm. So I thought that it wasn't going to happen then, but it still was different. I even if it hadn't happened then, you were on a road that was a new one. So, so there's my perspective.
Yeah. Well, we can do all kinds of things here, but let's talk for a couple seconds. I want to just kind of clarify a couple things. So when we talked about the February thing, we did that probably 5 or 6 times is my guess.
Oh yeah.
And I can remember several times where I made it 2 weeks and said that was enough.
Right.
And a few times we made it nearly to the end, but I don't think we ever made it to the end per se.
I don't remember. Yeah.
And just for the listener and to validate with you, this was also at the same time that I was starting to do things like, the February thing and I'm going to only drink on the weekends. I don't think those were over the top of each other. I think the February thing was an anomaly of itself. And it was a few years later where I was starting to try to do the moderation thing, where I would, in theory, only drink on the weekends or have a light night. Mm-hmm. These were words that I would use with you.
Which was 6 beers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, it was 4. Because I'd hold my fingers up, I remember. And they were, of course, tall cans.
Right. You got the bigger.
Right.
So it was like the equivalent of 6. Yeah.
Right. And meanwhile, as we've talked about, I've got booze stashed all over the house. So while I'm holding up my 4 fingers, it's a lie to you, and it's actually a lie to me too, because there's a part of me that somehow or another believes that I didn't just chug a can of Foster's in the garage, or that my big swig of Jameson in the basement isn't part of the 4. Anyway, that's the crazy stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
But when we talk about this trigger and this trust, you'd seen this play out before, mm-hmm. meaning if I said I was only going to drink on the weekends, that meant very little, mm-hmm. right? Because it would maybe only be 2 days. Now I'll do it next. So you talked about kind of I'm going to use the word divest. You're divesting. You're trusting less.
Yeah.
And you've also said that you're starting to think about an exit strategy. Now we're getting close to the final approach.
Yeah, that was soon before we moved to Fort Collins, which was the final approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would love you to paint the picture. I think it's a pretty big chapter or story in the middle of all this was the night that old lady was out and about.
Yeah.
Because for those that are addicted or whatever, basically I'll just say that by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, I'm of no use to humanity.
Yeah.
Like somebody needs to be picked up at the airport.
Even that was progressive. Yeah. Even that was back when we first met, you were not helpful if a vehicle needed to be driven.
Right.
But you would have figured out a way to get a vehicle. You were still functioning after 5 o'clock. And arguably in our little cabin in Pagosa, you still were able to function. Your brain, even though you were slurring, if there was an emergency, the adrenaline or whatever kicked in and you would have been able to function and been useful. You were always adamant that you weren't going to drive, which I appreciated. And you made that a big point for me as well. We took a lot of taxis. Mm-hmm. But that night, so that was, it was the winter. So it must have been January before the spring deal. So it was when things had gotten really bad. But we were sleeping in separate rooms basically because you were continuing to drink.
Yeah.
And I think you thought I didn't know that, but that is where I had disconnected.
And continuing to drink, just so that we're clear, meaning that after you'd gone to bed.
Yes.
I was continuing to drink
Right.
into the evening hours.
Right.
And so it was probably just as well that I wasn't climbing into bed with you, because I wouldn't remember getting into bed with you,
Right.
and et cetera. Anyway, yeah.
So yeah, we're living in this really great little town, Fort Collins, and we're got a bunch of neighbors. And this little lady 2 houses down had Alzheimer's or dementia or something, and her son lived with her. And there were a couple of times before that night that I had found her wandering, and I brought her back home. And so this one night, it was snowing, and it was a warm snow. Like it was cold enough to snow, but it was this thick, wet snow.
Yeah.
And it was probably about 1:00 in the morning, and I could see shadows of somebody walking past my window, which freaked me out.
Sure.
And so I'm frozen in bed for a minute, thinking that maybe it'll just go away, which is my first reaction. And then I got up and peeked out the window, and I see the silhouette of this little old lady, which scared me too. It was weird. I mean, it was weird what happened in my brain. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I can't remember her name. And so I ran out there, and she's barefoot. She's in her nightgown, and she had a little robe on, but she's soaking wet, cold. I don't know how long she'd been out there.
Right.
And she was talking about her husband, and, that she needed to find him, and her husband had been long dead. And
right.
So I'm, knowing I need to get her home, and also, that's right. So I went to her house, ran to the house, and knocked on the door because her son lived there, and no answer. So now I'm starting to panic that not only is it going to be hard for me to get her back home because she'd get really argumentative,
right.
but I am not going to be able to warm her up. Like, I'm starting to think I'm going to need to call 911. So I come into the house to get you, and you were so out of it. You couldn't, you barely, you did wake up, but you were not making any sense. And it was a tough moment for me, because I realized that you were no longer a partner. Like, you were no longer somebody that I could rely on if I was in trouble. And, it wasn't me that needed the ambulance, but what if it was, and that went through my mind. What if something happened to me and you're the only one that can help me, and you're useless at that point? And we did call 911. I don't remember if you did that or I did, but someone called 911. And then I remember the paramedics coming and trying to talk to you. And I was so embarrassed because you couldn't make sense of anything. And anyway, the lady was fine. The son was there. He was just sleeping really deeply, so everything ended up fine with that situation. But that was a big moment too. And I think part of the thing that was challenging for me, because you weren't, again, even in that situation, it's almost like you got easier to be around as you drank.
Yeah.
You still were fun to be around, And I think that, people that knew you during that time, I know they had no idea. They knew you drank. They knew you partied, but they didn't know to the degree of what was going on. So that still made it challenging for me, because I couldn't say to somebody, yeah, my life is just horrible, because it wasn't. We still would go and have dinner and breakfast, and we'd have fun, and we did things together. But here I'm watching you health-wise deteriorate. That was the other thing too, when you talked about the doctor visit. I had gone to a doctor appointment with you. I don't remember where we were, if we were living in Washington, it doesn't matter. But it was when you still were not being honest. Mm-hmm. And I remember one time you were more honest than you ever had been. And you told the guy you were having between 6 and 8 beers a night. And I'm like, oh my gosh, because that's a lot of drinking. Like that's more than most people, well, really anyone that I knew. And I thought, wow, this is really going to alert this doctor, because I knew somebody else needed to shake you because I wasn't able to do it. And the doctor said, oh yeah, it's not the alcohol. And I was just horrified. Yeah. Absolutely horrified.
Right.
And felt alone and all that kind of stuff. So I do remember the doctor that you talked about, and that visit. I remember his cowboy boots, and and he was an older fella, and I remember him saying, alcohol is not your friend. And I remember him talking to me a little bit, and asking if I needed any resources, and so yeah. But I do remember that there were, with that full court press and that period of time, something had shifted in you. And I did have hope that even if you didn't stop drinking then, you were on the road to getting there. Yeah. But again, I think that's something that's so hard for partners, is to decide when is enough. Like, if it had taken you 15 years and it had gotten worse, and it's hard to say how long I would have stuck around, but I'm sure glad I did.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. There's so much to what we're talking about right now, and we've talked about this along the way too. I think about when you're sharing right now the different things and what's happening to me during that time, my reality, because that's the thing is that my reality was so different. But as we talk about the full court press and the things that you've identified as changing, just to tie it to my last podcast, this is also during the period where I'm now in front of the mirror. I made it a point every night. I'm in front of the mirror every night. This is after you're in bed. I'm standing there. My face is drooping off my face, and I'm having those conversations with myself. So I would argue that something had changed.
Yeah.
And when we both read that book, I'll Quit Tomorrow, that was a substantial wake up for me, because it was the first time I'd read something. The first time I'd been curious. Mm-hmm. That's not true. I read a book in Ridgefield called the alcohol addiction cure or something like that. It was this long book, and at the end it said you had to stop drinking. And I said, well, this is garbage.
Right. Where's the one that tells me how to drink?
Totally.
Right. Yeah.
But that small voice had some reps. And I would argue that most of us have a small voice that is looking for opportunities to cry out. Mm-hmm. However, that's a metaphor. But
yeah,
for me, that cry out is in front of the mirror. And then there's that other side of me, the bully, that's mad at you for seeing the recycling, mm-hmm. right? That's protecting that precious.
Right.
And that's a weird one. Mm-hmm. It's like a seesaw. And anyway, I just think about that, because November I'm having the issues with my bowels, right? Mm-hmm. I'm bleeding, mm-hmm. and now we've moved to Fort Collins. And mm-hmm. I remember when we moved into Fort Collins, that's November. It's not till May that I get sober, and I think mm-hmm. we must have moved into Fort Collins in December, January, right through there, because of the story you just told about the old woman. So that little house is where I do my the worst of it, mm-hmm. the worst of the worst. Mm-hmm. The airline bottles in my socks, where we're going into town, the hiding at a level that I'd never done before, and then the full court press happens. So yeah, that all might not be needed here, but I wanted to overlay kind of like my reality on top of what you're describing there.
Yeah.
And
well, and I think it's interesting too, like that whole idea of the little voice, because early on, when I would first say, like, why are you drinking so much? Like that bully side of you, it was an offensive thing for me to ask. Like, mm-hmm. you were offended.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling bad that I would, ask you that. And so I think that was alive and well, even way back in the beginning.
No doubt.
So, and then the whole deal of trying to stop drinking in February. I mean, I think that was that side of you that was like, hey, maybe you should try something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something that you and I were talking about when we were talking about this podcast, or this interview, is the idea of AA and Al-Anon and what that was like for me. And I want to share a couple things just in case there's somebody else that's hearing this and maybe my story is resonating with them. Because the one thing that I have found is that I desperately wanted to talk to somebody that could understand what was going on for me. And I did go to Al-Anon, and I think Al-Anon is a wonderful place to be able to find people that have similar stories, you know. But for me, and I only went a couple times. So what do they say in AA? If you don't find one, go to keep looking, basically. And I didn't do that. But those couple of times that I went, I didn't hear any stories that resonated with me. And part of me at that time, I thought, well, it's because I'm a freak, my story is just so different. And I think, and when I say my story, basically the story of being with someone like you that was functioning,
right, and
that there really I wasn't being abused. My life was not horrible being married to you. And, so I'd sit in those rooms and hear these gut-wrenching stories of, resilience and, horrific abuse and neglect and then people getting out and standing up for themselves and, just these amazing stories that are so important to share. Yeah. But it wasn't my story. And I just felt like, gosh, I shouldn't be here. Like, I felt like I can't now share that for me. Because at that time, what I was having a hard time with was, it was more challenging for me when you got sober. And I was horrifically guilty to feel that way. Because I never, ever once thought, well, I wish he'd start drinking again. I was so proud of you and I was so on board but you, all of a sudden, what you had been using to deal with stress and frustration and all the emotions that humans have, it was gone. And you didn't have any other skills. Well, I shouldn't say any other skills, but you know what I mean? Like your main go-to skill that worked really well, you didn't have anymore. So you would get frustrated and you would get cranky and I'd never seen that before. And so in our one-on-one relationship, day-to-day relationship, all of a sudden I'm getting to know this different person. And it wasn't like you were still wonderful to be with and all that kind of stuff, but it was hard. And we got into more fights. And I was like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Right. This is when the rainbows are supposed to be coming out. And, this is the part of the movie where the credits roll and, the drinking has ended. Well, for me, that's where a lot of the work started in our relationship.
I agree.
And we had some rough patches and I really felt alone at that time. And I just felt like, what's wrong with me that, here is, I have this husband who is sober and working on being sober, working on improving himself. And I'm having a hard time. So when I went to Al-Anon, that's what I was hoping to hear. And I heard the exact opposite, that it was so much easier. It was so much better. And so I just felt like maybe that would be helpful to share that it is, I wouldn't have any other way. Like I'm so proud of you. And it has gotten hugely better. Like we went through a couple of different rounds of counseling as a couple that were awesome. And, we got to know each other in ways that we hadn't and how to support each other. that in the past alcohol, really kind of took care of, but at the same time it didn't, because here we are sleeping separately,
Right.
emotionally we're close to each other. We're good friends the whole time, but there was that lack of trust that, I can't count on you if something happens, that kind of stuff. And so we had a lot of learning to do and a lot of growing. And so I guess if this resonates with somebody listening, that again, I think that probably Al-Anon, I think that there are many people that have this same story. And I probably just didn't stick with it long enough to find somebody. And you and I ended up being able to talk to you about it, because I didn't talk to you about that for 5 years. Yeah. I mean, I think maybe my mom was the only one I talked to you about it. And the dogs and the horses. But yeah, I mean, that was rough for me.
Well, I got two things to add to that. First off, for those that don't know what Al-Anon is, right? It's just like Alcoholics Anonymous, AA. Open your computer and you can go find it. Al-Anon is as pervasive as AA, almost, and basically it's for family members that have addiction in their lives, and their relatives or their kids or their wives or spouses, and they have meetings just like AA does. And I know many, many people who have gotten a lot out of it and
Absolutely.
are big believers and advocates for it. And I say to all those people, awesome.
Yes.
But what I think is really important is that just like me telling my story, which has the elements in it, you're telling your story, which has the elements in it. And it's okay for those that right now are listening that are Al-Anon fans and your danders just come up because, that's worked really well for you. That's understandable. As humans, we want to advocate or help people with things, find things that help you as well. But I think it's safe to say, at least to date, and maybe in the future it'll change, Al-Anon really didn't do much for you during a period of time in the little bit of trying that you experimented with.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
And yeah, that's fair. And then it's also fair to say that it's a tool that I did not use enough to be able to say that it didn't work. Like I just didn't stick with it and I didn't keep looking. And I just felt like, well, I'll be able to read books and, I'll be able to deal with this on my own.
Right.
But there's still a part of me that would love to talk to other people that have a similar experience with that. And the other thing to say on that is the huge level of gratitude I have for both of those programs, for AA and Al-Anon. I know you do. But for me, going to those meetings with you, like early on, you were going every day, sometimes twice a day.
AA we're talking about.
Yeah, AA, yeah. And I started to go with you, not as much, but I probably went once a week.
Yeah, I'd say that.
And I, again, similar to what I was saying earlier about my view that you couldn't, early on when we were first dating, that you didn't match the problem drinker. You didn't match the alcoholic. And even like, we just watched Crazy Heart. That's more stereotypical of what movies portray. Although he wasn't abusive. He was just sloppy drunk. So maybe that would be a more along the lines of what you were like. But what my view of AA was a really dry, not happy, dusty, dank room.
Before you went in.
Yes.
Yeah.
My view of it, based on what I'd seen in movies and that
Right.
kind of thing, was that it was not going to be a healthy place to be.
Yeah.
Really depressing.
Right.
And I went in, I don't remember which meeting was first, but we went to that one above the Mexican restaurant in Fort Collins, and it was buzzing. Like people were hugging each other and talking. I mean, before the meeting started, and then the meeting settled, and people were sharing these incredible stories, and it was so inspiring. I mean, I didn't relate because I didn't drink like that, but I related in that I was human and I had things that I was struggling with in my life, and all I saw was a bunch of people trying to be better people.
Yeah.
And kick-ass people, like, athletes and professionals, and then some folks that looked like they'd fallen out of the car a couple times,
Yeah.
and the more stereotypical. But even those people, like, I don't know, it was a really inspiring place. The level of humanity and a genuine interest in improving their lives was inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the other thing I wanted to bring to bear on this, just like for the person who's an alcoholic. There's that word. Sorry about that for those that just got bit by that word, because it used to bite me. There's a saying, like, if I'd have my first AA meeting, I'll tell that story sometime. And my story, as you know, doesn't start with AA. I don't find AA until 2 weeks in. But one meeting is not going to tell you what AA is. Mm-mm. 2 meetings isn't. Like, you probably want to shop around a bit. And so, like you're saying, it could be that if you shopped around a little bit. But at that time, we were in a small town. For whatever reason, it didn't work for you, and that was okay, right?
Right.
The other thing I wanted to throw into the mix here too, when we talked about that early first year when and I joke around, but it's true, my emotions are back online, like my humanity is coming back online.
Yeah.
I remember that period too, and being frustrated as well that, why was I getting, and the bottom line is for years, as long as my 4:00 train was arriving, I didn't have opinions on things. Mm-mm. I didn't advocate for things particularly. Mm-mm. I just sort of was along for the ride.
You were so happy-go-lucky. You were so easy to be around.
Yeah. And so now all of a sudden I've got opinions on things and stuff. And that was a rocky year. And if you sit around in the rooms and you watch the stories, divorce in the first year or two is pretty common. And that's it could be okay too, right?
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I just wanted to validate that, especially for somebody who's just getting sober, right? It can be rocky for a year or two. And I've met people that it's rocky for longer as they, reconnect with family and, children and all kinds of things. But yeah, I just wanted to validate that.
The other thing to add to that is that, like you said, your humanity came back online. It's like you plug back in. And the other thing that I remember being, and I still to this day am so, I feel honored to witness, is you experiencing things for the first time, or, now it might be for the 10th time, you going to a soccer game, you having your nephews over for game night, and you're there.
Yeah.
You're present for it.
Yeah.
So you were also present for the emotions that you hadn't really dealt with before, the frustrations, the irritation, whatever, fill in the blank. And it was a rocky road, but you also experienced these amazing moments of joy and connection and humanity, like, to use your term, that you hadn't before.
Absolutely not.
You'd been there for those, and people might be surprised to hear that part of it, that that know you, because again, you were so fun to be around, but you weren't really, you were there, but you weren't there like you are now.
Yeah.
Because you were thinking about the drink, or it was about the party. It was about the
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for those of you that are listening and that are like really resistant to the word spiritual, because to go into the rooms of AA, you're going to have to look at this word in the face, this word God, and you're going to have to look at this word spiritual if you want to hang around, because it's going to be every day that you're in there. Like, I can get to that place when I think about what you just described, to sit with my nephews or with you, to play a game, to have fun, to laugh, to make jokes. These are things that I didn't think were possible on the other side of that giant, what seemed like the Grand Canyon to get across, which was really only one step of, I don't mean that in the AA tradition, I mean stopping drinking and becoming human again. And it turns out that everything you're describing, to me, is as spiritual as it gets.
Yeah.
To me, it's as spiritual as it gets that you and I can go to a concert and I can go in there and listen to music and remember it all. I mean, this sounds kind of, as I listen to myself talk, it sounds kind of stupid, if I'm honest. But for me, and for you too, what you're describing is spiritual.
Yeah.
I get into the car, you've had a couple of glasses of wine maybe, or maybe not, and I'm driving home without a care in the world other than I'm in love with you and I'm holding your hand and it's safe with me behind the wheel. And that's what being human is. And I wasn't capable of that with the claws of, alcohol in me every day.
Right.
It's.
And I think that if you were, because I think a lot of the times that, like, when you say alcoholic or spiritual and you want to say to people, if that just bothered you, the reason you're doing that is because it would have bothered you, right? So you're sensitive to that.
Yes.
That, hey, but I think, a lot of people will hear that and not be bothered in the slightest.
Right.
You were talking about how you didn't even know that it was possible. I think if you had been listening to this 15 years ago, as a active alcoholic,
a banner flying drum majorette of alcohol.
Yes.
Yes.
I think if someone were to say to you that that's now that I've stopped drinking, I'm able to have all of these different experiences, I think you would have been like, well, I have those. What are you talking about?
Totally.
Right? Like, I laugh with my nephews.
Right.
We have so many memories during that time. Like, we had wonderful times, but there is a level of presence. And I know that people listening can relate that when there's a difference between sitting in a park when you're thinking about other stuff and sitting in a park and feeling the breeze and looking at the trees and feeling the sunlight on your face and connecting. That is, I think, what you're describing as a spiritual experience. When you're connected to the world around you, that is the difference, as far as I can tell and witnessed, is that you used to be in the park, and you would have maybe moments of being present, but, further and further into your journey with alcohol, the more you were consumed with thinking about, like, you were always in a hurry to get to wherever the alcohol was.
Yes.
So if we went to the dog park and when we first dated, actually, and I'm sitting there just watching one of my dogs and laughing, and you thought I was nuts. And like, what is interesting here? And you wanted to get to where the party was.
Yeah.
Why would you be wasting your time here where there's no alcohol, there's no fun?
Yeah. Add a little cooler to the mix on the beach there, and
then it would have been different.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's it's a common story too. I just want to add one more thing. It occurred to me. I use the word nephews multiple times because that's who's been at our house before. My nieces are in the mix as well.
Oh, absolutely.
It's any family function because the problem is that what that group of people, nieces, nephews, family, doesn't realize is I come to the beach or I come to the Christmas function, and the way I party there doesn't stop when I leave like everybody else.
Right, exactly.
It just picks up the next night in a different way here at the house, and that's where that abysmal, quiet, solo, spiral downward is. You see me those 2 nights a month where I'm at the friends are in town, we're having a campfire, we're at the beach, there's plenty of alcohol. You're going to see me gregarious and loud and stuff. I may not remember some of it because at the end there I was drinking so much so quickly. But the thing is with me, it doesn't stop there. And those that they can come to the beach and do that.
Right.
And that's great. This is a condition where that's not possible for me. It has to continue. And then you get the front row seat to see that
Right.
go to the next day and the next day.
Right. And I remember,
Yeah.
I remember thinking about that and us talking about that idea of like, because you and your dad and your brother would, like Christmas or Thanksgiving
Sure.
or whatever, you guys would tie one on
Yeah.
and, you know, be playing records and,
Right.
and it was jovial. It was this
Yes.
wonderful connection. And they basically would rise to your drinking level, you know, or your dad would sure give it his all, right? But I don't know if they ever did completely. But again, that was, to them, that was a one-off, right? And then you're hungover the next day, or maybe 2 days you feel really awful,
Right.
and then maybe it's not for another 6 months or a year that you party like that. Or, you know, for some of us as we get into the older years, like in my 20s, maybe I would do that and then again in 3 months. But now it's like I haven't done that I just wouldn't do that to myself. But anyway, yeah, the point being that was a night for you.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe a little more than usual, but not much.
No.
And like you said, near the end, it was the way you did things. You do it until you passed out.
Yep.
Yeah.
This feels like a good place to start to wrap this.
Sure.
Although every podcast I've said that, it ends up going into another conversation. Yeah. And I think that this will probably benefit lots of people. So I think we'll probably want to do another one at some point if you'd be up for it.
Sure. Just text me.
Yeah.
Get on my schedule.
Yeah. But I think maybe as a closing, just a quick touch on this. You know, we now, I'll be sober, as you know, in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You've celebrated every year with me. I've got cards from you, and there's a bunch of ways to go with this, but I'd love to just kind of go right to where we are now. And when we go out or when you're at home, and specifically the one that I want to really laser in on is, I hear this a lot. Brett, does your wife drink? Right? And the answer is yes. And you drink like a normal person, but I'd love for you to add some color to that topic, and maybe we can go back and forth a little bit, but does my wife drink? The answer is yes. Say something about that.
Yeah, and maybe this might need to be a part 2, because this is a big topic, and you obviously can do whatever you want with the editing and everything. But maybe this is a second part, because that is something early on that I struggled with.
Sure.
Because the pattern of that I now understand that happens for people who are addicted is that there's a place that alcohol or drugs get you to that is pleasant, allows you to deal with the world, fill in the blank there, that is a pleasant place. And then what happens is it progressively takes more and more to get to that place. And that place maybe lasts less and less. But that hope that this tool that got you to this place is going to keep working keeps people after it. And that's a very simplified version. That there's a lot more to be said about the disease, about what it does in your brain and how it takes over the mammalian part and all that. I think is fascinating, but that is close enough to how everybody experiences alcohol, that it continues to be something I have to talk to you about. That why am I any different? Like I know why, partly, but then the part of that I will get to a place where I'll have one glass of wine a night, and for me, it's always been. A big part of it is the ritual of it, holding the glass, pouring the wine, smelling it, all that stuff, like cooking, whatever it's attached to. Similar to you, like the lawn mowing, the family gatherings. And it's easy to start to go, well, I'll just have a second glass. And then pretty soon I'm having 2 glasses of wine a night. And then what I talked about earlier, I was having 3. And so for me, I have had to just be aware of that. And for me, for health reasons, now I'm starting to realize that for where I'm at in my life and whatever's going on, health wise, that doesn't, the wine is no longer a really good thing for me.
Mhm.
Like, and that's a whole separate topic. But for people that drink in a healthy way, I think that it's healthy to kind of go, maybe I should back off a little, and we're able to.
Mhm.
But the things that come along with it, like, when I cut wine out for a while, and then I start thinking, oh, maybe I'll have a glass. I'll start thinking about going to the store and making sure to pick some up, and those things that you would describe to me, that obsession. I'm like, well, gosh, am I obsessed? Because I'm thinking about it, but it's different.
Mhm.
I know it's different, but it's close enough. The patterns are close enough that has been a challenging thing for me. Like, that just asking why. And then the other added piece to that is that here I am with a husband who is in recovery and feeling bad about having alcohol at all. And that has been a journey for us. Right?
Yeah.
It still is.
Sure is.
Where you have done an amazing job of reassuring me that if by you drinking a glass when we go out to dinner, if that causes me to start drinking again, we're in trouble.
Right.
Right?
Totally.
Like you've got to own it. And I know that, I understand it, but I still feel like, or you picking some up at the store for me.
Right.
Which under normal circumstances, a partner or a roommate or whatever, it's like no big deal. They're picking up a beer or picking up wine. But if you pick it up for me, I mean, all these thoughts that go through my head. What if somebody from AA sees you, or, and I do think about that. Like, what if somebody that admires you sees you and then thinks that you're drinking again, or just, they're not dumb things. I was going to say dumb things, but that really isn't a dumb thing. But then feeling like, is it going to trigger something in you by carrying the bottle? And,
Right.
And that being said, when you first got sober, we didn't have alcohol in the house for at least, it might have been a year, but I know it was 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I did start to drink like a glass of wine when we'd go out to dinner,
Right.
here and there, in that time frame. But it was really important to me, even though you didn't. I don't think you probably needed it. I don't know. I just felt like at that time it was just too fragile, and I wanted to show support for you. But again, that's my story. We're all so different, and I think if a couple decide, if somebody listening to this decides that they're going to continue drinking while their spouse is, or whoever is in recovery, I'm definitely not saying that that's a bad thing or you have to stop. But for me, I needed to not have it around.
Right.
For you. Like I felt like I didn't know what exactly my role was, what I could do, but I felt like that could be one easy thing that I can just keep out of the house. And
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, we're telling our story.
Yes.
It doesn't mean it's the same story as everybody else's, but, that idea of identification, that maybe this resonates with some and maybe others it doesn't. And some families I've heard, addiction medicine doctors saying, you don't want any alcohol in the house for 6 months, whatever. We didn't have any of that. We were flying it on our own, and we still are. We're still
Mm-hmm.
understanding what it means to have a partnership where one of us is in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me to stand in the wine aisle and look at the wine and think maybe somebody from AA is going to see me, those in recovery on this that are listening in that can relate to what I'm about to say, you'll laugh. I get a charge out of that. Because here's the thing is if somebody that is in one of my meetings or whatever, if they were to approach me and say, hey, I see you're at the wine aisle, like, that's how rich that community is. That would not be out of the ordinary.
For somebody to do that?
Yeah, I can imagine that happening. But there's also I haven't met very few people with this condition that aren't.
Rebellious?
We're rebellious by nature, right? You tell me one thing, I'm going to do the other thing, right? So, there's something, at least for me, my sobriety, at least that I've experienced yet, my story is my story. For me to pluck a bottle of wine off the shelf, for me to go and pick up even a gallon of frickin',
Irish cream.
Whatever. Yeah, even my favorites, right?
Not that was.
I don't think I'm in jeopardy because I'm so clear that one drop of any of that stuff into my system, game changer.
Right.
And I think it's a biological level. I think my neurons and synapses and wiring is ready to rock. And so, how many times have we been at a meal where I've said, hey, Molly, can you taste this to make sure there's not booze in it?
Absolutely.
And that's because I'm that careful. I can't get any in me.
Right.
But to pick them off the shelves and to see people enjoying drinks and stuff, or whatever, you alluded to it. If as soon as it's not for me, I'm in trouble.
Right.
And if I'm in a situation where I see people, you or anybody else, drinking in ways that is uncomfortable for me, I'll do something about it.
Right.
I have to. I have to take care of myself.
Right.
And maybe I call somebody else that is a sober person. I've done that many times when I'm in a situation. So at least with our story, it's a process, I think is safe to say. But I don't have a problem with, as you know, I don't have a problem with you having wine here.
Right.
And maybe that'll change. And I also, as you know, support you when you want to say, you know what, I need to back off wine for a while. It's not healthy for me. Great. Let's do that.
Yeah, that just happened 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's in the mix here too, as part of our story. I think that'll maybe help a few people out that, are playing around in that space and trying to understand. Just to hear somebody else say something that maybe you've experienced is often very helpful in these things. So yeah.
And then the other little add-on to that we already talked about is if you didn't hear anything that you've experienced.
Yeah. That's
also okay. Like what I was talking about with Al-Anon, that it didn't mean that there was something wrong with me, even though that's the way it made me feel.
Right.
We're just all so different, and we all experience things so differently. And so for the person in recovery who isn't okay with somebody having a glass of wine, that's okay.
Yes.
Like, know that and share that and protect yourself with all you got.
Yeah.
Like you've shared, like I think you just alluded to, you have to own it, but you also need to protect it and be like, hey, I own that this is my responsibility, but if being around the smell of it is troublesome, get the heck out of there. Stick something up your nose, or don't do that. I guess that's not a good reference, but you know what I mean?
I totally do. And that's a common story. Like, you go into these rooms where everybody tells their story. It's a common story. Like, people will say, I had no business going into bars for the first X number, or, that conversation between a wife and a husband or spouses around how they're going to navigate. That's their story. Right. And I've heard lots of different takes on that. And that's
and there's
their
so much
story.
Strength in that.
Yes.
Right. Like, I think that sometimes, people will, I don't think we think of it of other people as much as we sometimes think of it of ourselves. Like, if in that example that you said, just going to bars, if that would trigger, and shouldn't be in there, that would be a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But if that were triggering you, and let's say your buddy who's in recovery, it doesn't bother them at all, oftentimes we think of ourselves like, gosh, I'm kind of weak, or maybe my recovery isn't as strong, and BS. Like, I feel like there's such a strength in knowing what is your deal, like what's right for you and what you need to do to protect it. And that's where the strength lies. So.
Totally agree. And, like I said, you go into meetings and you hear some stories, there's a lot of patterns, there's a lot of, commonalities, and, people that are early on might take somebody with them to an event like that's in recovery,
Yes.
so that they have a buddy there. I mean, these aren't weaknesses to ask for those things. It's not a weakness to have somebody in my phone for me to call and say, hey, I'm in this situation and I just need to talk about it or get it out. Or maybe I need help, or maybe I need a ride. I need to get the heck out of here.
Yeah.
This is all part of what I heard early on, recovery or sobriety has to be my number one priority. And so what am I going to do about that? So we start there and we go from there. That's my story. It's a common one. And in my case, I'm totally comfortable now in particular. It's been a long time since I still have little moments, but it's been a long time since the draw of drinking has been upon me. But many people, it hangs on for a while. And steering clear of those places is probably a good idea. I mean, I remember Steve Arnson talking me out of going to the Bruce Hornsby concert when you were out of town. When I'm like 3 or 4 months sober. I was up at Mishawaka. I think that's how you say it.
Something like that.
Yeah, Mishawaka, I think. And I wanted to go to that concert terribly. And I'd bought the tickets before I'd gotten sober. I had a bus to take me up and back, which was going to have booze on board.
Right.
I had the VIP ticket, so I was going to be in an area where drinks were going to be served. And I probably would have been okay. But we had a meal. He said, let's just go talk about it.
Yeah.
And he kind of took a minute. And so this is a process. This is recovery. It's not well, some people say they're recovered. That's fine. I think it's just, for me, it's just navigating the world.
Yeah.
As a sober person, including with you, right?
Yep.
And us having sobriety in our lives is this thing that we have to kind of share together. And yet at the same time, I have to do it kind of my own volition as well. So it's
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a good conversation here in the house with the dogs on the floor and next to us. Anything else you want to say on this podcast?
Just that I'm grateful to be a part of this with you. And I'm grateful for people that share their stories and do the things that you're doing. And, I've seen so much beauty and strength, and even in people that are really struggling, like it's just people trying to live healthy lives, which I think all of us are trying to do.
Right.
And, it's, not the easiest thing to do, but it's sure worth it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're doing it.
Me too. I'm glad to do it with you. And, thanks for hanging in there with me during those tough years.
Yep.
Cut.
Well, that's the conversation. Thanks for listening. I think to conclude this podcast, I'd like to just let this music play a little bit. This is a recording of a song called Tweedy's Wedding that I recorded for my friend Sean Tweedy and his wife Megan Tweedy on their wedding. And I'm just going to let it roll for a little bit. Thanks for listening. We'll see you at the next podcast.